Welcome, folks, to another episode of That Anita Live. Emotional healing to help you create a happier life. I'm Anita, your host, and this week we're discussing family pieces. As a child, my guest today carried the heart-wrenching pain of being denied. But as time went on, her family blossomed. She's here today to help us learn how to mend relationships and move forward in life with the family pieces. She's one of 6 authors of a new collaborative book, Women Who Overcome. What's up, Desiree?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here today.
Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
Let's get into this story here.
All right, let's go.
Now, I would say, just looking at you, I would say that I would not guess that you're a person that would remember growing up in a house that didn't have indoor plumbing.
Oh, yes. That's what a lot of people say when they look at me. The first thing they look at is the outside. They don't see what I went through. I remember being a kid, probably about maybe 4 or 5. We didn't have an indoor plumbing. We didn't have a bathroom. Actually, our house was 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. So we went to the toilet, it would be a bucket, and we would take it outside. Or you would go to the outhouse. I never went to the outhouse because I'm afraid of snakes. So I would never go to the outhouse. I'm sorry, I kid you not, I would never go.
And what state is this in?
This is in Southern Virginia. I grew up in Southern Virginia. And the good thing about the house that I grew up in was that my grandfather built it. Like, he built it at a time where a lot of blacks didn't own homes. He was in the military. And so he actually built the house with his own hands. But at that time, of course, they didn't have plumbing. They didn't have running water. And then he died at a very young age. He actually died at 32. Wow. He was killed in a car accident, from what my grandmother told me. So she was left to raise. At the time, my mother wasn't even born. She was actually in the womb. Wow. So at that time, when he died, it was 4 other children, and my mother was on the way. So it was 5 children. And my grandmother never really upgraded the house anymore. But the crazy thing, the funny thing about it is, when I went to school, a lot of people didn't know that I didn't have running water.
But that's a question that I had in reading the book, because you said the other kids would tease you. But usually when we're growing up, even though kids find differences, we are within the same socioeconomic group. So we all really have the same issues and problems. It just shows in different ways. So was it that the other kids had indoor plumbing?
Oh, the other kids now. See, where I grew up in my street was different. Okay. So when I went to high school, I went to school with people whose parents were attorneys or lawyers and lived in better situations. So some people that I went to high school with, yes, they had the latest Nikes or Adidas or whatever was going. But middle school, elementary school, all of it. It was just with the street that I grew up on. So everybody was bused too, because I grew up in a small town, so everybody was bused. So I may be on the bus for 30 minutes. So it didn't matter where you live, but I may be on the bus for 30 minutes. And we didn't have where it was divided by, well, okay, I live in the nice area or the lower area. Everybody went to school together. So it was not divided by your socioeconomics when I went to school.
In addition to that, one of the pain points that you talk about a lot in the book is not being able to be daddy's little princess.
Oh, yes. It hurt my heart. I wanted to be the apple of my father's eye. And the best memory I have of my father, I was about 5. And he came to pick me up from my mother and my grandmother's house, and he says, and we had this store called the Crossroads store. It's at the end of the road, and it was like a crossroads, right? And he says, well, he come to pick me up, and it was probably like summer or springtime, because I remember it being very warm. And he says, well, you know what, I'm going to take you to the store. And at the time, we had penny candy. So all the candy was a penny. And he says, I'm going to go take you to the store and get you some penny candy. And I felt that was the best I've ever felt with my father. He took me to the store, got me 100 pieces. I thought it was $1 million at that point, because Dad came and got me and took me somewhere. And then I never seen my father from that point on until we went to court.
But being that you didn't see him a lot, what was it? How did he become to mean so much to you? Like, What was that was pulling within you that you felt like you were missing?
I was missing, for me, I feel like I was missing the support and the love that a father can give you. So in my house, it was just, at that time, was really...
At 5?
At 5, yeah.
At 5?
Yes, I wanted that. I wanted that, but you got to remember...
Where else did you see it?
That's what I was going to say. Like my cousin who lived directly across the street from me, she had her mom and her dad. So if I went to school, my best girlfriend, me and her are still friends. We've been friends over 30 years. She had her mom and her dad. Everybody around me had their mom and their dad. Maybe in a couple of that didn't. And then you got my other neighbor that lived across the street, had mom and dad. So everywhere I saw the images that there was mom and dad. And I wonder, well, when is my dad coming back? So that I can have those relationships, and I would see them, because like I said, my best cousin, she lived across the street from me. We're actually like distant cousins. So we're like, she's like in the 3rd generation of my family. And I would see her and her father go to church together, because we all went to church together. I would see them go out together, but I was left without no father to take me.
Did you ever express that to anybody as a child?
No, I was that person that kept everything bottled inside. At that point, I didn't know how to express it. Because I was looking for the love from my father and didn't know where to get it from at that point. And I was sad, I was depressed, even had self-esteem issues about it, because I felt like at that point, especially being so little, it was my fault. Well, why didn't Daddy come back? Why wasn't he here? What did I do wrong? Never knowing that at that point, my dad was just at a different point in life. Later on, I found out he actually moved to a whole nother state. And he left. I didn't know where he was. There was no telephone numbers, no nothing. Like, I heard absolutely nothing.
From 5 to 13, you heard nothing.
I heard nothing to 5 to 13.
But then 13, there was that one day.
That was that one day. And I remember this because my mother, I have a younger sister who's about 10 and a half years younger than me. So at this point, my mom decides, because she wasn't getting any help for me, no child support, no nothing. So she was on her own trying to take care of me. And that was probably like in the 80s. And she decides after she had my sister, well, you know what? I'm going to take both of them up for child support. And at that time, when you did child support, they rendered a DNA test. So we get to the court, and I remember, and for some reason, I wanted to go. And I was like, Mom, let me miss school. I want to go. I want to go see my dad. I saw it as I'm going to see my father.
Excited.
Excited. Like, I haven't seen my dad since I'm 5, you know. So now I'll get to see my father, and I'm thinking he's going to come to court. Yes, he's going to own me. He's going to take up the onus. He's going to give me everything that I missed from 5 to 13. So the judge was like, well, you know, he was saying, well, Mr. Johnson, we're going to have to do a DNA test, and, you know, is this your child? And he said, no, that's not my child. Mind you, I'm in the courtroom. I was heartbroken at that time. I'm like, well, don't I look like you?
And you're probably the first generation that actually will have that memory of being in the courtroom and hearing that. In that moment, how did that, it didn't change any feeling? What you thought about towards your father?
After that, my whole world was crushed. But I was like, how? I was sad. I was depressed even more, because at that point I'm like, well, he's saying I'm not his. And then I'm, in my mind, young mind, well, who is my dad then? If he's not my dad, then who's my dad?
Can you still hear that, though,
yes,
in your head?
I still hear that.
A lot of what our parents said becomes our inner voice.
Yes, I still hear that, even though my father's deceased. He's been deceased for about 16 years almost now. I still hear that, and that, I'm 40 now, so that's been years ago.
But in the courtroom that day, you still held it in?
Yep, I still held it in.
Didn't express it to anybody?
Didn't express it to anybody, not even my best girlfriend. I grew up as one of those people that just held everything in. Just never talked about it.
How did the rest of the day go?
The rest of the day probably went terrible. I don't even remember going back to school. I think I shut it out after that point, and I was just waiting, because we had to go back. We had to go back, and I said, I'm going back, you know, I'm going back to this courtroom. And I remember going back in that courtroom, and the judge was like, you are 99.9% the father. And I'm like, you know, in my mind, yes, but then that's when a lot of hatred started, you know, building up, because at that point the judge was like, well, You're going to have to provide health insurance. You're going to have to provide dental insurance. And my dad was like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not able to do that. I got more children to take care of. I'm like, more children? Wait a minute. I thought I was your princess.
Wow.
See, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and they told him how much he had to pay, and it was a very low amount. It was like $30 a week, you know. And that $30 a week, to me, it wasn't enough, but it was all I got from my dad. So if my mom was like, hey, I'd be like, Mom, I need some new shoes. She'd be like, well, I don't have no money. I said, you got my money from my dad. And I would get to argue with her back and forth, because that's all I had to attach to my father. That was it. I had nothing else. I went through.
Because he never called you?
He never called me. Actually, me and him were born in the same month. He never called me for my birthday. He never, to this day, I don't remember. I don't have a Christmas gift or a birthday gift that I ever remember that my father gave me out of my entire life. So I remember going through high school. I ran track. I participated in choir. Dad never came to any track meets, anything. Never showed up. So my grandmother, my mom's mom, she would always stay in contact with his mother. And she would always tell his mother, hey, this is what's going on. Graduation's coming up. So that's how he knew that I graduated and things.
Did you ever speak to that grandma, your paternal?
Yeah, I spoke to her sometimes. I would speak to her sometimes, but she was from the mindset that children out of wedlock, she didn't acknowledge. So she didn't acknowledge me that much as well. Okay. But my grandmother would always call her and talk to her and stuff. But no, he didn't come to high school graduation, nor my college graduation.
And you never expressed it. Now, do you feel as if it came out in other ways?
Oh, yes. Oh, it came out in a whole lot of other ways. Let me be honest. Anger, just angry all the time. I can say I was probably the most angriest person, especially as I got older, because I held it in for so long, probably like in my 20s, especially when I went to college. I drank a lot. I partied a lot. I don't even know how I got through. Because I was dealing with that pain of, hey, my father's not here. So I remember being in college, and it was one particular time I needed $200 for my books. I got on the phone, and I got his number from my grandmother. You know, she digged that we got his number. And I said, Dad, I need some money for books. I got to finish college. He said, well, get it from your mother. I said, oh, okay. We had a payphone at the time. I went just like that. And I went back to my room, and we didn't have email at that time, so I got my old-fashioned pen and paper, and I wrote this letter. I basically wrote, I think I was about 19, so it's like my sophomore year, going into my sophomore year. I wrote him out my life. I said, you're not coming to my wedding. You're not going to see your grandkids. You're not going to see this. You're not going to see me get married. I mean, I went through this whole thing of what he's not going to see about this $200. And I don't remember everything else I wrote, but I do remember that. And I put it in the mail. And I mailed it to him. I got his address, everything. I mailed it to him. I never spoke to him again.
Now, after that, did you feel as if that writing of that letter was a release?
It was a release, yes. It was a release at that point because I don't remember everything. It released some anger, but not a lot. It didn't fully get the closure that I needed, because I needed to talk to my dad. So I remember after that, I went through college again, like I said, drinking, partying.
We'll learn more about the self-medication that Desiree went through in those college years right after this.
What if I told you that you could stop the negative tape from playing inside your head? What if, with 7 simple steps, you could leave the pain of the past behind and live every day as your true, authentic self? It is possible, and you can do it. The ebook, 7 Simple Steps to Beat Emotional Baggage, How to Become Whole, Healed, Healthy, and Happy, shares how to resolve emotional baggage and feel free to live true to your own personality, spirit, and character. Transform negative thinking into positive thinking and become equipped to boldly face your past and resolve emotional pain. Get your free copy at thatanitalive.com/ebook.
Back to hear about the self-medicating during the lovely college years. Where'd you go to college?
I went to St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Virginia. It was a small HBCU.
Know it well.
Oh, okay.
Used to travel there sometimes from Virginia State.
Okay, all right, yes.
So the self-medicating, as you mentioned earlier, was drinking.
Yes.
How bad did it get?
Oh my gosh, it was so bad. I remember I would blank out. I remember one time I blanked out. I don't even know what happened. I was in a hotel room, blanked out. I didn't know what happened. And I had one of my roommates, she could tell you more because I would forget half the stuff that happened.
Now, looking back now, do you feel as if that helped or made the situation worse?
It made the situation worse. It didn't help anything because when I woke up and I had those hangovers, that problem was still there.
Yep,
It didn't go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere.
Then you mentioned at the point where the relationships begin to mend, because you mentioned in the book that you met your father. He called you, told you to meet him at the bank.
Yep.
And he gave you $200.
Yes, he did. I remember that. So when I graduated in '99, about the couple days before I graduated, his mom passed. And I remember that. I cried. Of course I'm gonna cry. This lady, I know her, but I don't know her. She passed. She had cancer, so she died really quick. She had ovarian cancer. She probably didn't even live 6 months after she found out she had it. And so at that time, when my dad called me, I went to her funeral. I sat in the back. Me and my grandmother was my road dog. She was like, come on, let's go to the funeral. I said, Grandma, I don't want to go, but I sat in the back. And a couple of days after that, he realized that I was there. So he called. He said, I want you to come meet me at the SunTrust Bank. And I said, which one? And he told me. And I said, okay, I'm going to be up there. And I said, well, maybe this is a chance for us to, because at first I was like, do I go? But then I was like, no, you go. And he says, well, you know what? He apologized to me. He says, well, I'm sorry. And he just went on this long spiel. I'm sorry for not being there. And here's $200. I'm very proud that you graduated from college. And from that point on, we were able to.
Now, wait a minute. Because it does sound like at that moment, all was forgiven. Is that how you felt?
No, that's not how I felt. But it was the beginning. Because after that, we started talking over the phone. I would go see him every now and again because he didn't live that far from.
So you were open.
I was open. Yes, I was open at that point. To hear, just to hear and see what had been going on, through the years.
They had a hard time getting me to answer that phone.
But I was still wanting to be Daddy's little princess. Even at 23 when I graduated, I still wanted that.
So how did the relationship begin to mend?
So after his mother died, that's when the relationship began to mend. Yes.
He started to feel some regret at that point.
Yes. When his mom died, and so he decided, hey, let's talk. We would talk. I would go by his house a couple times, and I remember going to his house this one particular time, and I saw this picture of this young lady sitting there, and I said, I never called my dad, I'm gonna be honest with you. I said, Dennis, who's that little girl right there? I said, she looked just like you. He said, oh, that's none of your business. I said, oh, okay. I left it alone. I said, well, she really, really looks like you. I said, is that a sister? Because he never, at that point, even though we were still mending, he still didn't tell me about all my siblings, my nieces. He never told me anything. So I was still living in Virginia at that time, and I moved here. And when I moved here, we were talking on the phone, and he was telling me about just the Washington, D.C. area, the traffic and things like that. And I remember being here one Thanksgiving, and he says, no, he didn't call me. His aunt called me and says, well, Desiree, because his aunt lived across the street from my mother's sister. So she walked right across the street, and she says, tell Desiree to get home now. So they called me. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. My dad had a stroke at that point. So he was in the hospital. He was in Winston-Salem Baptist Hospital. When I got to the hospital, I didn't know what I was going to see at that point. When I got to the hospital, I remember sitting in the waiting room, and they said, well, Johnson family, please stand.
He couldn't talk.
He couldn't talk. Right. He couldn't talk. He couldn't say nothing.
But
I got there and they said, Johnson family, please stand. So I stood up, this other young lady stood up. And I said, well, we walking to the same. So we get there, our father, he's laying there, he couldn't speak. He had tubes everywhere, he couldn't speak. All he saw was me and my sister Tony standing on opposite sides of the bed, meeting each other, pretty much for the first time. He couldn't say nothing, he couldn't talk. And I don't know what was going through his mind. He never told me what was going through his mind. I think he talked to one of my older sisters, because they were like, well, why didn't you tell us? Why was she just this big secret? And he was like, well, I just didn't know if y'all would get along. That was his excuse. I didn't know if y'all would get along, if y'all would like each other. We're sisters. We're gonna get along at this point in our lives. And I remember from that day forward, and I'm still in contact with my sisters. With my dad, I have, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4 sisters, whole bunch of nieces and nephews that I have embraced.
He was in ICU. Your family just blossomed. It just
yes,
grew up.
It just grew from that day forward. My sister Tony.
Did you two say anything to each other?
Yes, we did. We was like, I was like, who are you? She said, I'm his daughter. I said, well, so am I. She was like, I never met you before. And so from then, she called my sister Ivor, because there's one sister that's older than her. Actually, they're the same age. They were born the same year. And we was like, meet us at the restaurant. So all 3 of us met at the restaurant, and we sat down and talked. At that time, we knew they was telling me about our baby sister, Makia, who was much younger than me. We didn't know about any other siblings or anything at that time. But we did find out that young lady in the picture I was telling you about, we found out who she was. She was one of our sisters.
So there's you.
There's me.
There's the 3 that you met at the hospital. 2
that met at the hospital, and they was telling me about the other one. And then there was one, my sister Kirsten, I remember this story. My mom was at work one day, and this young lady was saying, well, talking about her dad, I just don't want to see my dad, and blah, 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 blah. So my mom walks up to her at work and said, well, who is your father? She said, Dennis Johnson.
I said, oh, Mom.
I said, oh, my mom. Yes.
We're going to deal with this now.
Yes, that's exactly what my mother did. And my mom called and she said, I met one of your sisters on my job. I said, wow. Yeah. This was in 2000.
Folks have probably been whispering and going and telling and coming back, going and telling and coming back. So she was like, you know what, I'm sick of y'all. Let me just go ask this young lady for myself.
Yep. And at that point, it was 2003. It was like the summertime, I remember. And my father, I don't know what his explanation was for her. And I actually when I came home, I got to sit down and talk to Kirsten, but later that year, that's when my father died.
But, okay, he was released from the hospital, though.
Yeah, he was released. Yeah, he recovered. But what happened, he was still being sick.
But during the time period that he recovered, and you asked these questions, did he ever give any type of answer versus just responding to you?
He was just responding to me. He never really gave me any answers.
Did you ever ask him why did he deny you?
I didn't. I never asked him. Because I was told the reason he denied me was because he did not want to pay child support. And that probably was the truth. Because later on that I learned there was 5 children that he had trying to take care of him at that time. But the good thing was I was happy about, though, Miss Anita, is I was able to make peace with him before he died. We was on good terms when he died. Even though it was a really short period, because I graduated in 99 and he died in 2003. It was not a long time. Like me and my sisters, we all wanted to go out with him and have this big family dinner, but my father was sick. We never got a chance to do it. And when he died instantly. Like there was it was like an aneurysm from his heart to his brain. They was gonna operate. He was actually at the hospital. They couldn't do nothing to save him.
So is there anything that you are still carrying with you now? Or do you feel like the peace that you made everything okay?
I feel like in some instances, the peace I made still carried, but the courtroom incident, I feel like will never leave me. I feel like that will never leave me. I feel like that will go with me into eternity because I heard it and I seen it come out of his lips. And I look like my father. If you ever see a picture of him, I look like my father. And I used to wonder sometimes, well, I look like my mom. Now I look more like my mom as I got older, but as growing up, I look just like my father.
So tell us about this piece and how others can mend broken relationships. Because I got to tell you, once I cut somebody loose,
Oh, you done. You like my mom.
they're gone.
They go. You know the
No
one.
matter who it is.
You know the one thing about the peace, I got the peace from God. Because I was always in church. Even though sometimes I may not have been listening, but I was always in church and God has always been in me. But I think the willingness that I was open to go meet my father that day at the bank, that was my ticket. Had I never took that ticket, I probably would still be that crazy girl that was drinking and partying to some degree, because I would still be trying to heal and self-medicate myself. But I took that ticket, and I was glad that I took that ticket. So sometimes I think just being open to a situation, not always being closed. I know some people say, well, like you said, hey, once I'm done, I'm done.
Snip, snip.
You know, but I think sometimes just being open, that openness allowed me, and the grace of God allowed me to be able to have that peace. Because one of my sisters did not get that peace. To this day, she did not get that peace. So I'm glad I made that peace with him.
What let you know that your sister didn't get that peace?
She told me.
So she's still pissed.
She's still pissed. She's still pissed. Yes. Actually, they hadn't spoken when he died in years.
So what would be your recommendation to somebody whom their father was not in their life growing up, and now they're successful, educated, out on their own, and he is now starting to try to reach out to men. And they're thinking, I don't know what you need or what you're coming to me to try and get, but you weren't there for me when I was younger. Why should I listen to you now?
You know, my recommendation would be is to be open and listen. Because sometimes you got to think about, I'm a parent now, and sometimes you think about parents are not always, they make mistakes. They change, life situations change. Allow them the opportunity to tell their side. Now, whether it helps, some people are still going to be like, hey, I'm done, I'm over. But I think being open, start writing. Even if you don't want to talk to them, write them letters. You can put it in the mail and mail it to them. You don't always have to. Now we got email. Now we can email each other back and forth. We can text. We don't have to do that face to face if you don't want that emotional pain. But have some form of communication. Because I think we don't want to leave, for me, I wouldn't want to leave this earth not knowing how that person truly felt or what the situation was. Because sometimes it's not always the dad. Sometimes it's the mother doing things. So we just don't know until you give them an opportunity to speak and make peace with it, whatever it is, and ask God to help you and pray.
We all have dysfunctional families. Though we have to live with their decisions, they do not define who we are or what we become. Just like Desiree, keep living, but stay open. That family member will return, and you should be ready to forgive. If you'd like to learn more about Desiree Smith, visit Desiree Smith on Facebook. Make the commitment to start your journey to emotional healing today. I'm Anita, your host. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for where and when to see our next episode.